I love live events like this. I actually haven't done a live event in about a year. I've been on like a little sabbatical trying to raise kids and be a dad. So real quick, guys, why doesn't everybody just stand up? And I know I was sitting there for a while and I was like, oh, I just need to stand up. So why don't we stand up and bring your arms up like this. And don't hit the person next to you. Make sure you get enough room. What we're going to do is just a couple posture exercises, okay? So we're going to do this right here. There we go. Good. Good. That's the hummingbird. And now you're going to bring your hands right back here. And you're just going to kind of do some retraction. Okay, so you're going to bring your head back like that. There you go. Okay. And now let's just reach up like this. All right, cool. All right, you guys can go ahead and sit down. Did that feel good? Good. Excellent. Okay, so go ahead and go to the next slide there. So this is really the reason why I don't do a whole lot of events, right? And why, if you saw me, I came in a little bit late. I didn't sleep in. Okay, I've been up for quite a while, 5:30, but I was giving these boys a bath and letting mommy sleep in a little bit because we got a little joyful. She just turned 9 months old. And so at this stage, she's like crawling everywhere. We got to barricade her. You know, the boys are three, twins, identical twins, 3 years old. So they're all over the place, running around like crazy. And, you know, I'm just so grateful that my wife gave me permission to come out here because I love doing this, but I've got to get permission from her first. So thanks so much, Angel. All right, go to the next slide. So Amy gave a great presentation on insulin. And obviously, when we're talking about low carb, we have to talk about insulin and blood sugar. And we know insulin's jobs, one of its main jobs, like she was saying, is take sugar out of the bloodstream, get it into the cells. See, when you have elevated blood sugar, like if you don't have enough insulin, which is probably not the problem here, but if you don't have enough insulin, or if you're type 2 diabetic, type 1 diabetic, okay, type 2 that is no longer able to produce enough or respond to it, then you get this elevation in sugar molecules, and those sugar molecules, glucose, bind to proteins, and they create something called an advanced glycolytic enzyme. So when we look at that, advanced starts with the A, glycolytic starts with the G, and enzyme starts with the E. A-G-E. What do you think that does to you? Ages you, right? So insulin actually is trying to help us, trying to save our lives, because these AGEs are really, you know, they are really destructive. They're going to damage all the tissues around us. And they're like shrapnel going through the kidneys, okay? Just really damaging the kidneys. So we produce insulin, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide there. And insulin's job, again, is to take the sugar out of the bloodstream. However, when we've got elevated insulin, we're gonna end up storing body fat. Now go to the next slide there. Now insulin does a lot more than that, okay? One of the things insulin does is it elevates certain things like the inflammasome, which is a genetic pathway that amplifies inflammation throughout the body. So rather than localized inflammation, like if you were to sprain your ankle or get a cut or a wound or something like that, okay? In our house, we call it a boo-boo, right? So rather than a boo-boo, that's a localized area of inflammation. You get this amplification of inflammation throughout the whole body. So the whole body's saying, we need lots of inflammation. We need inflammation here. Why is that? Because our ancestors, whenever they ate, of course, they had an elevation in insulin, just like us. But when they ate food, it wasn't sterilized. You know, oftentimes we're eating sterilized food. And so when we take in bacteria and microorganisms, inflammation helps keep the microbial load down and under control, because systemic infections or infections that got into our bloodstream and spread throughout our body have killed more people in the history of mankind than anything else. So in order to prevent against that, the body elevates inflammation. Inflammation is an adaptation that we've made, that mankind has made, in order to prevent against systemic infections. Does anybody know anybody that has died from the bubonic plague? Bubonic plague, anybody? No, right? But yet that killed half the world. What was that, 600 years ago, 500 years ago, something like that? So we adapted, and this inflammatory process is how we've adapted, and insulin is a key player in that. Obviously, though, in our society, we have lots of food, right? Food is prevalent. We can literally spend all day long eating. Like, I got enough food in my house. I don't need to go anywhere. I could just eat 24/7 for, for a week before I run out of food. So we've got plenty of food around. So we don't need this constant stimulus for inflammation. We obviously need to reduce that. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So of course, we know that when insulin's elevated, okay, then we're going to store fat. However, when we are fasting, okay, or if we're eating this sort of low carb, high fat, well-formulated ketogenic diet, our body's going to start to use dietary fat and also our body fat to produce energy. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So no insulin available, or really I should say low levels of insulin. And what's going to happen, we're going to end up using our own body fat for energy. Who wants to be a lean, mean, fat-burning machine? Who wants to do that? All of us, right? Go ahead and go to the next slide there. So what else does a ketogenic, well-formulated ketogenic diet do for us? Well, we talked about it. It reduces inflammation. Like for me, I'm what's called a ectomorph, right? So there's 3 body types. Endomorph is somebody who, they look at a carb and they gain weight. Anybody relate with that, right? Like Jimmy that's here, he'd be an endomorph body type. There's the mesomorph, which is the bodybuilder. Like, do you know anybody that they eat whatever they want and they looked ripped? They just have this great physique to them. That's the mesomorph. And then you've got the ectomorph. I'm the ectomorph, which is basically I could eat whatever I want, okay? And, I just stay very, very thin, narrow shoulders. I've been told I'm too skinny, like all my life, basically. And, so I'm the ectomorph. However, my grandfather was an ectomorph and he had type 2 diabetes. He developed type 2 diabetes. And if I were to consume a higher carbohydrate diet, I wouldn't get fat. I would be skinny fat. I would have a higher percentage of body fat. In fact, I wouldn't be able to maintain my muscle mass. So I'm about 165 pounds now, really strong. I would probably drop down to probably 145 or so. I'd probably drop 20 pounds of muscle, but my body fat percentage, because I maintain somewhere around 8% body fat, you can see every striation, I'd probably be more like 14, 15% body fat. And I would not be able to think, I'd have no energy, I'd be chronically fatigued, and I would develop diabetes and probably dementia, Alzheimer's, or some sort of neurological issue. In fact, my grandmother, unfortunately, recently passed. She was about 80, she was 87, but she had dementia. And so that runs in my family, so obviously I would develop that, and probably cancer. So this is what happens. It affects us in all these different areas, but a ketogenic diet can dramatically reduce that. I know for myself, I feel the best when I'm fasting, okay, or eating 1 to 2 meals a day. When I am eating, I feel absolutely amazing. And so go ahead and go to the next one now. How many of you guys know somebody that has started a ketogenic diet and they felt awful? Raise your hand, okay? Probably most of us. As a doctor, I'm a huge advocate. If you've been to my website, we have lots of articles, my social media, and I hear this from a lot of people. Like, I started a ketogenic diet and it was like I had to pass out. I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt awful. Whatever it is, my hair started falling out. So I hear this all the time. And really, there are 3 common causes of keto side effects. I don't really, keto side effects, I don't know if that's the best term, okay? But 3 major things that can cause somebody to feel like crap when they're on a ketogenic diet. One is hypoglycemia. So blood sugar drops too low, and they don't have the ketones to support their brain. So when your sugar drops down, you don't have the ketones, you're not going to feel good. Hpa Axis Dysfunction. Raise your hand if you know that term, okay? Most of you guys are like, what does that mean, okay? It basically means the brain's not communicating well to the part of our body that helps create energy, like our adrenals, helps drive up brain function, allows us to think sharply, quickly, and perform. And then last one is the electrolyte imbalance, all right? And so let's go to the next slide there. So there's a big difference between hypoglycemia and keto or fat adapted here. And so basically, when we look at labs, they can be somewhat similar in some ways, like your fasting blood sugar. So if, like right now, my fasting blood sugar was probably, I didn't test it this morning, but it's probably in the 70s. Now, years ago, before I was keto adapted, if my blood sugar got in the 70s, I would feel irritable, I'd feel hangry, I'd like want to take a bite out of my arm. I would feel awful. And for some people, they get nauseous, some people, they get very dizzy, they've got to lay down, they've got all these different issues. Whereas when you're keto adapted, when your blood sugar's in your 70s, you feel great because you've got the ketones, and ketones are those amazing molecules that can cross through the blood-brain barrier and provide a fuel for your brain. If you don't have the ketones elevated in your system, the brain's gonna panic because the brain has got to have a steady source of energy. And if it doesn't have that steady source of energy, then it's going to panic. It's going to elevate stress hormones, and it's extremely stressful and challenging on the body when we have hypoglycemic episodes. As opposed to when we're fat adapted, we keep that blood sugar down. And things like that. So let's go to the next slide. So keto flu, okay, so here are 7 ways to prevent it. Number 1, back off carbs slowly. This is important for some people. Some people can drop carbs immediately and feel great results. How many of you guys did that? Raise your hand if you just dropped carbs. It was like one day you ate, cereal for breakfast, peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, pasta and pizza for dinner like I did growing up. And then the next day you were like, okay, I'm doing keto, and you completely dropped all those carbs and you felt great like within a week. Who did that? Raise your hand. So some of you guys can do that. That's amazing. And I love it because it's so much easier to get your body healthy and improve your insulin sensitivity. Some people can't do that. In fact, a major diet change is a stress on the body. Even if it's a healthy diet change, it's still a stressor. Stress just means change, basically, and our body's got to adapt to it. We need stress in our life. Stress is critical. We're always talking about how we need less stress, and for many of us we do, but to some degree we need stress. Exercise is a stress, right? Changing your diet is a stress. Some people just need to slowly and gradually adapt into that, slowly move into that, and I'll show you how to do that. Increase your fat intake, of course. It's a healthy, high-fat diet, so we start to slowly drop the carbs, start to increase fat, we start to increase salt and water intake. We get some exercise, get some movement, try to reduce other stresses in our lives, right? And if all else fails, we can increase our carb intake, and I'll show you how and why to do that. So let's go to the next slide. So Amy already touched on this, but basically when we have high insulin, we retain sodium. When insulin goes down, like we're on a low-carb diet, we start excreting these electrolytes, and our body's got to adapt to that too. It's got to adapt to retaining a little bit more of these. So in the beginning, you actually oftentimes need more sodium, more trace minerals, and you can get these things through your diet and obviously salting your foods to your desired intake. So let's go to the next slide there. So how many of you guys would say you are a experienced ketogenic dieter? Raise your hand if you're experienced. So looks like about half. How many guys would say you're new to this? This is pretty new for you. Okay, so good. So I'm going to show you how to do this for both of you guys. So for a keto novice, the first thing I tell people to do, and I'm like, people think, especially my patients, they think I'm a food Nazi. Like I'll see them in Whole Foods and they're like hiding there. They're like, oh, hey, hey, don't look here, So a lot of people are intimidated because I'm really passionate and also have been applying these principles, and I'm a purist, so I apply these principles. I've been applying these principles for 15 years. However, meeting my wife really changed my whole perspective because our first date, I was telling her, I'm like, oh yeah, this restaurant here, they've got grass-fed beef. And she was like, don't all cows eat grass? But I had to educate her on that, but had to change her ways, but she's an amazing woman. So the keto novice is this, basically I tell them the first week, okay, all I want you to do is actually count around how many carbohydrates, look at your food, count how much carbohydrates you are consuming on a daily basis, on a typical daily basis. And use up, I actually tell them this, I say, use up all those high-carb foods. Show them the food list. Use up all these high-carb foods that you have in your house. The reason why I tell them that is because not everybody is super motivated. Now, I should say I don't tell everybody that. Typically, I'll tell them to go out and get real foods. However, I've had a number of people that have said, well, I'm going to do that next week because I've got bread and cereal and whatnot in my house, and I don't want to throw it out. I want to use it up. Okay? And they're like afraid to tell me that, but I know that's what they're gonna do. So ideally, go out and get more real foods, right? Change over to real foods. And for the first, certainly the first meal, ideally your breakfast and your lunch. Okay, well, first off, we're gonna make sure you're not eating late night, meals, and we're gonna do 12 hours. I call it the simple fast between your last meal and your first meal. So if you finish dinner at 7 p.m., you wouldn't touch anything with calories till 7 a.m. Easy, right? Simple. Okay. However, a lot of people love that late night ice cream or whatever it is. So we get them off of that. And then I tell them, in the morning when you first wake up, make sure you start your day with water. Before you ever think about food, start with water. We have a hunger center and a thirst center in a part of our brain called the hypothalamus. So right next to each other, food naturally gives us a dopamine hit, meaning we feel good. We feel good when we eat, and that's a great thing. That motivates us as a species to drive for food, to eat food, keeps us alive. However, we don't want to constantly get that dopamine hit. Water gives us less of a dopamine hit. How many of you guys just feel absolutely amazing and just absolutely incredible when you take a drink of water, as opposed to ice cream? Okay, yeah, I didn't think so. Some of you guys have been doing this a long time, like me. Like, I love drinking water. Okay, but for most people, they'd say that's pretty boring. But you drink water, and what that's going to do is actually going to help balance certain hormones like ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, and that's going to suppress your appetite in the morning, which makes it easier for you to go a little bit longer in the morning without needing food. And that's important because that gets that insulin down just a little bit. And then your first meal, we want to start lower carb, high fat. What I've found is that when people start their day with something like oatmeal or cereal or something like that, waffles, pancakes, whatever, one of those types of things, high carb foods, when they start their day like that, it ends up creating a roller coaster of cravings. How many of you guys have experienced that? Raise your hand if you would say you've experienced that. Yeah. So if you start your day with like eggs or like a protein, high fat smoothie, throw like coconut milk or avocado in there or something like that, and you keep the berries out, you're going to notice a lot less of that. A lot less of the cravings, and you're going to be able to go longer. You're actually going to notice, hey, I'm not as hungry. It's lunchtime, but I'm just not quite as hungry. So start out like that. Ideally lunch as well, going very low carb for lunch, and then have a little bit more of the carbs in the evening. Like, so you've got this total carb count, whatever it is, 200 grams or whatever, you're gonna have a majority of those in the evening. And it's called carb backloading or calorie backloading. Both of these things actually can have some benefit for some individuals. Now, somebody that's very insulin resistant, they're not really gonna see a whole lot of results, but they may just notice that their hunger and their cravings go down and they don't feel bad when they do this. And that's what I've noticed. So that's basically your first week. Then your second week, you take that total carb count, whatever that was, you drop it in half, you cut it in half. So if it was 400 grams, you're gonna cut it down to 200 grams, okay? And ideally by week 2, we're doing real foods. So, we're off the pastries, we're off the ice cream, all that kind of stuff. And instead, we are going with carrots, sweet potatoes, nutrient-dense, real foods. So we do that for week 2. And then what we do is we take 30 days, and now we get that carb count under 50, and we go into more of that ketogenic stage, right? Somewhere 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates, and we are keto adapting. So this is a little bit less stressful for the body. Now, if somebody is really stress resistant, meaning that they go out for a walk and their hamstrings are sore, okay, that individual may need a little bit more tapering down on carbohydrates. So you kind of have to try to judge their stress sensitivity. If somebody's really overwhelmed by stress in their life, they're tearing up all the time, crying every day, things like that. If they've got a lot of stress and a lot of emotional reactions to stress, they might need to tighter down just a little bit. This is personalized nutrition right here, guys. This isn't cookie cutter, just follow this plan. This has got to be personalized because everybody's different. Everybody's life is different, their stress levels are different, and a good clinician or a good program is going to help somebody tighter this down properly. Now, for those of you guys that are keto experienced, so there's another subset that have done low carb, done keto, and had success with it, but then the holidays come, and they've got all the cakes and goodies and all that kind of stuff, and you come off of it, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's the new year. The last month I just trashed my body with all of these carbs. It was a lot of fun, but now I'm feeling the effects of it. How do I keto adapt back? Certainly you could just, night and day, the next day, start very low carb. Or you could try to do, a lot of people, beginning of the year, they're like, okay, I'm doing a 5-day water fast, starting the day after they partied on New Year's. Okay, and for some people, they're willing to go through the stress and the pain of that adaptation, and that's great if they're able to do that. But for many people, it's just not a really good option. In fact, it can end up creating a feeling of defeat, a lot of discomfort when they're trying to do that, and they may not get the results that they're looking for. So if you go to the next slide, what I'll do is on week 1, we're just going to cut it down in half. Okay, so again, cut those carbs down in half. So if you've spent a month very high carb, cut them down in half. And then week 2, go ahead and go into a ketogenic, a well-formulated ketogenic diet. Does that make sense? Is that helpful for you guys? So this way we can reduce some of the stress that can take place when we do an extreme diet change quickly. Now, let's go, and we got to remember, this is a long game. This is about a lifestyle. It's not about how quickly can I drop 50 pounds. Does that make sense? I would much rather somebody follow a sustainable ketogenic lifestyle for 50 years rather than trying to do this quick weight loss approach for 3 months. So this gives somebody a lot more. It's just more, it's easier transition. Let's go to the next slide. So other things that are really helpful, really hydrating your body well. I find that hydration, I know for me, I hydrate I'm like a camel. I mean, I'm constantly drinking water. I'm drinking gallons of water a day. Hydration to me just really helps me run well. And I find that, really, I think we're really bioelectric beings, meaning that we don't eat for energy. We've all been told that we need to eat for energy. That's not true, because think about Thanksgiving. You eat a lot of food, and then how do you feel an hour after that? Does anybody have a lot of energy after that? No, right? You want to lay down. So you took in all this potential energy, but it's very stressful in the body. You got to use a lot of energy in order to convert that into energy, to usable energy. So as opposed to that, I feel my best when I'm fasting. I'm most energized, my brain is alive. And so water and electrolytes are what conduct neurological energy in your body. So we don't eat for energy, we eat for adaptation and recovery, to provide building blocks so we can recover, build new healthy cells, regenerate our body. But water and electrolytes will give you a lot more energy, if you're looking for energy, than food will. So we gotta hydrate well. Use a high quality salt. I like Himalayan sea salt, Redmond's real salt, Celtic sea salt, a lot of good ones out there. Also, using magnesium supplementation can be really, really helpful. So how many of you guys are a fan of using magnesium?